Well, we're back for Sermon 3 here on hell and death and eternal conscious punishment. And we just talked a heck of a lot about Sheol. And now we want to look at death and that maybe it's not the end. So until now, we've seen some pretty consistent stuff from the Bible. Human beings are dust, they get breath, and they are a living soul. So in other words, without the dust, without the body, and without that breath, then you aren't. And when that breath leaves and the person stops living, the body returns to the dust. And where do the dead go? Sheol. So that place described as below the earth, silent, without thought, without activity. Not heaven and not hell, just a place for the dead. But, of course, now a question should be forming. If death is final and Sheol is without anything and completely silent, is that the end of the story, or is there something more? Because when we move to the historical books of Israel in the Old Testament, something very interesting starts to appear. It's not a full answer yet, but there are hints. Back to 1 Samuel 2:6, the Lord kills and makes alive. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. Now that's a fascinating statement. God brings down to Sheol, and we've seen that. But then there's this unexpected thing of, and he raises up. So where does he raise from? Well, he raises from Sheol. So let's just pause there for just a second, because this is really the first place in the Bible where these two ideas are put side by side. So death and the reversal of death, Sheol coming back from Sheol. It's not really explained here yet, and it's not developed, but it's there. It's something introduced. It's a possibility. Death might not be the final word. Now let's continue this with a very human moment. A father loses his child, and he says something very simple but revealing. 2 Samuel 12:23. I shall go to him, but he will not return to me. Notice what David says here. He does not say, my child is now in heaven. He doesn't describe communication or awareness or any sort of interaction. He simply says, I will go to him, which fits exactly what we've seen. The dead all go to one place, and that place is, of course, Sheol. But something is still missing. We have death, we have Sheol, we have silence, we have no activity or awareness, and now a hint that God can raise those non-entities from the dead. Now, we don't have a clear explanation, not yet, but a pattern is beginning to form. So creation leads to life. Death, you return to the dust. Sheol is a place where those dead go, all dead. And God is able to raise. Now here's the tension. If God raises from the dead, then death isn't permanent. But if the dead are already alive somewhere else, then raising them wouldn't make much sense. So let that sink in for just a moment. If someone were already alive in heaven or hell, why would they need to be raised? Why would they need to be brought back? The idea of resurrection only makes sense if the dead are indeed totally and completely dead. And this is kind of how the Bible works. It's progressive revelation. It builds piece by piece and layer by layer. And right now in the Bible, we're sort of standing at a tension moment. We know what death is. We know where the dead are. And we're beginning to see that it might not be the end. And so this makes the question sharper, not just what happens when we die, but how do we live again? Because if the Bible's answer to how we live again is resurrection, then everything changes. Now, next time, we are going to go someplace a bit unexpected. We leave the historical books of the Old Testament and we'll go into the wisdom literature. And this is where the Bible stops giving history and the stories and starts reflecting rather deeply on life and death. And here's where we find some of the clearest statements in the Bible on life and death. And of course, that just pushes the tension between kind of how we think about life and death and what the Bible actually says. It pushes that tension even further. And we're going to see statements like, the dead know nothing, and see what that may mean. And that is where we will go next time. And until then, God bless.